Welcome back to the Stimmy Package ZHP project and part 1 of my clutch DIY. So here I am lifting the car up. I'm doing it in a couple stages because I need to get this thing 24 inches up above the ground just so the transmission can roll out from under the car, and it gets a little bit scary with just the jack. Now I'm removing the World exhaust. It comes out pretty easily, much easier than it went in because the fitment in the last video, like I said, is absolute duty.
Okay guys, so with that big pile of parts taken off right now, I have pretty good access to this exhaust right now. I don't think there's very much to it. I just gotta undo the guibo and the center support joint right here. This trans mount's gonna come down so I can get to the top bell housing bolts. I'm gonna undo the slave and then just zip tie it out of the way so I don't have to re-bleed it, or at least run out of fluid and really struggle to bleed it, because I will be re-bleeding this anyways. And just looking around, I have a leak from this oil level sensor. It's a slow leak, but it's coming right out of the sensor and not the gasket, so I got a new sensor to replace it. And these new TRW control arm bushings are starting to not fail, but they're starting to fall apart, because you can see this little rubber ring right here has fallen out of the control arm, and it's the same for the other side. I don't know why that's happening, and I think that rubber ring is supposed to stay in the control arm as much as possible. So it might have been when I was doing the autocross with the 200 treadwear tires that there was just a lot of force from the grip of those tires just pushing these rubber rings out. So I do think polyurethane bushings are in my future. Anyways, the World exhaust came off really easily because it was only in there for about a week. And just giving this car a once over, I don't see anything else that needs some maintenance. So let's continue on with disassembly.
Moving on, here I am assembling the hoverfly transmission jack. I ended up returning this in the end and buying a nicer 800-pound one just because with this thing fully extended, it felt like it was going to tip over. Anyways, here I am removing the flex disc out of the car, and then also removing the center support bearing. I ended up just flipping the center support bearing over and tightening it back up, and then hanging the drive shaft out of the way, and then just kind of going to work around it.
So at this point, I got most of the underside taken care of. So what I'm planning on doing right now is getting this shift knob and shift lever assembly out of the way, which is pretty simple. All we gotta do is undo some clips, take out some of this foam. There's 2 screws that hold the center trim on, and with that it's a lot easier to pull out that rubber shift boot, not the Alcantara one. Now I do have one of those cool golf ball shift knobs, but it's not that BMW one. It's actually a Volkswagen part, and then I had the machine shop at my school make me an adapter. So it's a 14mm thread, and it goes from that into a M12 by 1.75 bolt, and that's how that shift knob works. So this is the play that I get with the factory shift lever, and it's got a really worn pivot ball, but the foam insulator on the shift selector rod is actually new. So it's pretty decent, but it's definitely not the greatest. So while we're doing this, we'll see if we can get a short shifter put in. Now if all goes well, this should just pop, oop, and it did, pops right out. So the tip for this thing is there's these little indents right here that fit into the slots of the carrier. Now what you want to do is just twist this about 90 degrees till these slots are not in the carrier, so they squeeze themselves in. Once that happens, this should pop out of this carrier really easily. This wasn't the case when I was doing this the first time, and I actually had to take a screwdriver to the bottom of this and just whack it out, just because it was stuck in there after 20 some years or so.
So next up, I'm assembling my engine support bar because I'm eventually going to drop the transmission brace, and then I need something to hold the engine up so it doesn't tilt all the way forwards. With everything disconnected on the drive shaft and on the interior, I'm ready to start breaking loose the transmission bolts. You can see that I'm going to use a variety of electric ratchets, impact wrenches, breaker bars, and extensions to get everything off. Once we get closer to the side and top bell housing bolts, I do end up having to take that transmission brace off. I let it hang, but once I realized that the engine support bar was holding everything up just fine, I got rid of the transmission jack that felt like it was going to tip over anyways. So you can see here, I'm using an impact trying to get everything off. Here I'm using an electric ratchet, and in the end I got everything out.
Alright, so we're taking a pause right now. Took a long time trying to figure out how to get all the extensions to work. I didn't buy one really long 24 or 36 inch extension based on the recommendations of some people, just because they like the flex in having multiple extensions so it fits in better. I found out that that's kind of difficult too because there's too much flex and you can't use your impact gun and zip all of them off. Anyways, everything is out. I put number 9 and number 5 back on just so the transmission doesn't fall out in any chance, and I did smack out the dowel pin holding the starter in, which would be these two bolts, and I just did that with the same extension, like 24 inches worth of extension, and then a 6 millimeter hex key. You're gonna need a lot of different tools. What I'm gonna say is you're gonna need about 24 inches of extensions, and then give or take a couple extras here and there. I have these kinds of universals, and quite frankly, they're garbage. I've had these for probably going on 10 years now. Never liked them, and even for this job, when I tape them up, nothing works. They're honestly garbage, and I would kind of just throw them in the trash after I buy some pinless universals. I've also stopped because this thing, I've realized, is pretty much junk. And I'm going to go return this and buy the nicer one because this doesn't really let the transmission balance on its platform very well. The other ones, the nicer ones, have those L brackets that you can squeeze and butt up right against the transmission so it doesn't rock as much. This one also came with these legs slightly bent, so it doesn't really swivel and move around very easily. So I'm just worried that even if I do get the transmission off, I won't be able to get the right angles to put the transmission back on. So better to be safe than sorry. I'm just going to return this, spend more money on the nicer one, and just use it, and then hopefully in the future I'll never ever have to borrow a transmission jack ever again if I'm doing a clutch.
With the new Harbor Freight 800-pound transmission jack, and I totally recommend this unit because they even include Zerk fittings on the main pivot point, so it seems like they built this thing to last. But I'm able to get this transmission out from under the car in under 5 minutes, so this made the process cake. Next up, I'm undoing the pressure plate bolts. I believe those are 5mm hex. Those come out pretty easily, but the pressure plate was pretty stuck on those flywheel dowels, so I did have to pry it off. Then comes taking off the flywheel bolts, and those are the giant T60 Torx bolts. Now, the Torx bit I had was just barely long enough to clear the dual mass and actually bite onto the heads of those Torx bolts, so just pay attention to the bit that you buy from whatever store you get it from.
Okay, so another breaking point, we got the trans completely out, clutch, pressure plate, flywheel out, and the new stuff unboxed. So we'll just kind of go over what's going on here. This may as well be original. You can see that there are ridges that are supposed to be in the material, but this is worn completely flat. Basically what was happening to me was when it got really, really hot after driving for a while, fourth gear would slip. No issues otherwise, no noise in the throwout bearing, pilot bearing, none of that stuff. It was all good. Same deal with this. You can just see that it's well used. It wasn't broken or anything. I don't know how much play is allowed. There's actually not any play, just moving it by one of the dowels. And again, looks fine to me. Still original BMW stuff, so I think it's original. On the trans side of things, this is one leaky boy. So let's take a quick look at this guy here. I took out the pivot pin and everything like that. That's just sitting here. Weebo, cracked, but not frayed. This original plastic pivot pin, you can't really see much wear on it, so it's actually pretty good. This clutch pivot fork, absolutely dirty with clutch material. You can see a little bit of shiny wear spots there, and then also in here where the throwout bearing rides. I may replace that because I got to do another parts order anyways. And then the throwout bearing here, it's got a lot of play. I don't know if this is right. I think it's one of those self-aligning ones, so they give you a lot of play and stuff like that with it, but there it is. Parts that I got to replace that with would be stainless steel one from BMW. I have an INA pilot bearing in case I want to use this over the aftermarket one. Throwout bearing wise too, same deal. So this is the throwout bearing that I got with the clutch kit, and this is the INA one. Again, this INA one has a lot of play, just like the factory one, or the one I took out of the car does. Don't know if it's right or wrong. I'll ask around. And here's the pilot bearing from the clutch kit. This one, part number wise, is the same one the grip force kits use. So I have a grip force kit in my E46. I don't really think that it's going to be that bad if I do decide to use this instead. Let's continue on. Otherwise, the input shaft seal, or I guess the tube, looks fine. There's some wear on it, but I think I'm just going to sand it and then grease it up again and reuse it. Input shaft seal does look to be leaking. There is fluid on the bottom of this guy, and there is some traces of a drip there. Not good. You can also see the rest of this covered in filth and oil. I don't know where all this has possibly come from, but this shift selector shaft seal is also leaking, so this guy's got to come out. Besides that, I don't think the output shaft is leaking. There's no way to tell based on how leaky this is, and I don't want to take it apart. So we'll wash this in a day and wait for parts to come in. And then a quick look at the kit that I bought. This is your eBay favorite, well, I guess your second favorite or most hated one, and it is Clutch Max. I've read a lot of bad reviews on it, but I mean, if I do a proper break-in, I think I'll be okay. Anyways, this is a stage 2 kit, sprung clutch. I don't think I need anything more than a stage 2. I'm not making big power in spec E46. Steel flywheel, one piece, it's supposed to be balanced, so I shouldn't worry about this. And then this is their sport, I think, pressure plate. I think the stage 2 and up discs, maybe even stage 1, use this same pressure plate, at least in the description. If you buy the OE version of it, it's like the OE pressure plate. So these should be stiffer, and the eBay seller told me that it is barely heavier than stock, so we'll see when install time comes. That's all we got. We gotta wait for some more parts, mainly transmission seals, and then we'll go from there.
So with this downtime, I decided to do some other projects. One thing I didn't want to do is put this grimy transmission back into the car, so I used my trusty friend Super Clean and a pressurized garden sprayer, because I don't have hose access at my apartment, and clean up that transmission the best I can. It's 100 times better, and it won't leave me covered in grease when I'm working on it. The next thing that I do is also remove the rear main seal off the car. It wasn't leaking, but there was just a little bit of wetness around the crankshaft, so better to be safe than sorry and not have to drop the transmission at some time in the future. At this point, I also do the oil level sensor because I had to drain the oil for the rear main seal. This is kind of annoying because that oil level sensor was only 2 years old and a hella brand, but what can you do? One of the studs for that oil level sensor also pulled out, so I ended up thread cleaning the oil pan and then Loctiting that stud back in so that thing won't ever back out, and I know that it's going to tighten on properly. And lastly, I'm just hammering out the old rear main seal, not destroying it because I need to reuse it to drive the new seal back in. You can see that I tried to do it on the folding table. There was too much movement, so I finished it on the floor. Now I'm just grinding away some of the old RTV sealant and then hammering in the new seal with the old seal, making sure I'm not driving it in too deep. And the last part of this video is going to be reinstalling the rear main seal. You need to get a new gasket that goes on the back of the block. You also need to RTV the 90-degree angle between the oil pan block and the rear main seal carrier. The next part is torquing on all the bolts. I like to torque the oil pan bolts first so it pulls the carrier down towards the gasket, and then you tighten the bolts on the back of the block, not forgetting to red Loctite or thread seal the two bigger ones on the bottom left and bottom right, because oil will leak out through those if you don't. And there you have it. That's everything I got for this part 1 of the clutch DIY video. We're just waiting for more components such as a clutch fork, a guide tube, etc., and then we'll be able to put the transmission back on the car and button everything up. Thank you guys for watching.